They ate the watermelon. Why do they even do that? At this point, VRChat isn't really new. It's been out in one form or another since 2014, although it didn't really start to pick up steam until, well, Steam. Not that long after reaching the platform, it fell into the hands of some streamers. Soon after, it exploded in popularity. If you don't currently play VRChat, but you've heard of it, chances are you've seen it in a meme compilation or something of the sorts. It has a mixed reputation, which is evident when you scan YouTube for a hot second. If you haven't heard of it, explaining it is pretty simple. It's a virtual chat room where most of the content is user created. That means that the avatars, worlds, experiences, it's all created by the users. So when you see cat girls, wolf boys, and many memes, know that this wasn't intentional. No one at VRChat wanted it to be this way. It just is because that's what the community wants. Despite the name, however, VRChat isn't just for those with VR headsets. It's for anyone that can run it, either on PC or your headset of choice. While it's best experienced in VR, plenty of people stick to desktop mode and never really leave that. I've known about VRChat myself for years. It's been relatively popular in my group of friends, but I just never got it, I guess? That was until the entire world flipped on its head. Being locked inside can drive you a bit batty. You can't see your friends, you can't see your family, you can't see anyone. You also can't go anywhere. Even if you're an introvert, it feels just suffocating. To make a long story short, my wife and I started to spend a lot of time together in VRChat. What started as just a way to kill time in the middle of a pandemic quickly became something more. Soon, we began to go on dates to all kinds of exotic and beautiful places. Eventually, she wanted to make us both custom avatars. Like they say, when in Rome. I've stuck just about 100 hours into VRChat now, which, to be clear, feels like nothing, but it is enough for me to feel very strongly about one thing in particular. VRChat is magical.
Your avatar can look any way you want it to, up to the limitations of your equipment. If you're ugly, you can make your avatar beautiful. If you've just gotten out of bed, your avatar can still be wearing beautiful clothes and professionally applied makeup. You can look like a gorilla, or a dragon, or a giant talking penis in the metaverse. Spend 5 minutes walking down the street and you'll see all of these.
So depending on what media you've been exposed to, you're probably going to have a preconceived notion of what VRChat actually is. A lot of anime avatars, miles and miles of them. Wait, in fact, this doesn't really feel right. No one wants to watch a bald 30-year-old man lecture them about VRChat. Let's change this up. There we go. Now, where were we? VRChat is a community-based social and creativity hub built in the vein of many of its predecessors, like Habitat, Worlds Away, Active Worlds, There, or Second Life. The idea is simply to give people an environment to socialize or create in, and at the end of the day, that's basically it. It's a socialization engine, but an extremely stylish one. A few of my friends asked me what the point is. What is the objective of VRChat? What kind of game is it? And that's the thing, it really isn't a game, although there's certainly games within it. Seriously, people will straight up recreate all sorts of games in VRChat, from RPGs to shooters to clones of other VR hits. But the point of VRChat is to just kind of do whatever you want. So yeah, you log in, pick your avatar, and then you jump into one of a few hundred worlds, most of which were created by the users. Maybe you meet up with a friend and play a card game, or maybe you decide to go to a virtual nightclub. Maybe you meet some friends, maybe you just have a laugh. Sometimes you'll just start up an hours-long conversation about anything. The game client allows you to hop around virtual worlds pretty seamlessly. The UI is intuitive, and there's just not that much of a learning curve. On the other hand, the game itself is questionably welcoming. This is a game that is just an unparalleled mishmash of creativity. Anything you want to create with a few limits can be here. There are so many worlds that are just acid trips, man. I have seen things. I've seen so many things. And the avatars can span everything from sentient toilet paper to, as I've said already, all sorts of anime characters, some original and some not. And all of that creativity goes places. It's a chaotic mess. It's at times a performance nightmare. When you let anyone upload avatars and worlds, you're inevitably going to let in a few things that aren't exactly nice to be around. Much like with that Snow Crash quote, avatars can basically be anything that you want. If you can model it, you can probably bring it into VRChat. Not all models are created equal though, and while some will perform smoothly, others will bring even the best gaming PC to their knees. There are in-game safety settings you can use to prevent particularly resource-intensive avatars from loading, but there are ways to circumvent that system, and that can lead to a bad time. A few times, I've gotten motion sick due to an especially malevolent avatar. Likewise, I've been hit by waves of screaming children and skyscraper-tall avatars, or swarms of people throwing dead memes around and new memes that make me just ugh. And look, I know it sounds like I'm complaining, but I think VRChat is truly what VR was always supposed to be. When I first read Snow Crash and was introduced to the metaverse as a kid, VRChat is exactly what I was envisioning in my head. I've always been obsessed with virtual reality. It's always just been something that I've been fascinated by. Sometime in 1996 or 1995, I can't remember, my parents bought me a Virtual Boy. At the time, they'd been discontinued, so they were fairly cheap. I remember seeing it sitting on the end cap of a long-gone toy store. I only had 2 games, and it was complete garbage, but it got my imagination going like nothing else. As a kid, I had to stay home from school sick quite a bit, as while I didn't know it at the time, my immune system wasn't a big fan of my intestines. That means I spent a lot of time on the then developing pre-.com boom internet. That meant GeoCities and lots of chat rooms. Eventually, one day someone suggested to me what is, in my mind anyway, the real predecessor to VRChat, ActiveWorlds. ActiveWorlds is a 3D chat program launched in 1995 as an offshoot of another project by Worlds Inc., who'd previously developed another semi-3D chat program called VRChat. Eventually, ActiveWorlds would spin off into its own company due to internal interest issues. That's probably a good thing, as their parent company became known as notorious patent trolls. ActiveWorld's big difference was that whereas VRChat was all built by developers, ActiveWorlds was built by users. This building was done by moving around in-game objects. It would be a stretch to call this proto-Unity, but it works in a very similar way. You use shapes, put textures on those shapes, and then move them into place. There's a rudimentary scripting language to modify objects with in a variety of ways too. ActiveWorlds was basically built like a web browser. You'd spawn in a gateway that was basically just a general chat room. Through the UI, you could teleport to different worlds. Some of these worlds were hosted by individual people on their own servers. Others, however, were referred to as public worlds. One of these public worlds, Alpha World, was the largest, and usually the most populated with a few hundred users at any given time. These particular worlds were hosted by ActiveWorlds themselves and were basically just free-for-alls. In Alpha World, anyone could make buildings. This led to the world being filled by all kinds of creations, some incredible, some not so incredible. The big draw of ActiveWorlds was that you could quite literally build communities. People would come to this program to make friends and build things, often at the same time. It was genuinely really cool and way ahead of its time. There are whole cities here built by communities that formed in this world. And when I say cities, I don't mean that you click a button and a city pops out or there's some kind of system for setting one up. There isn't. Someone just decided one day, I want to build a city. The developers never intended for this to happen. It was never encouraged or forced. Someone just willed it into being. But ActiveWorlds hasn't really stood the test of time. It's clunky, it doesn't perform well, and while many of the in-game creations still hold up, it doesn't look good. It's also abandoned. The company behind AW has a pretty tumultuous history, and I'm not going to go into it here. It was also limited by the technology of the time. You could always tell that there was more that they wanted to do, but they just couldn't afford to add features. At the time though, ActiveWorlds was the coolest thing. I met people from all over the world. I created things, joined and built communities myself. I was part of a city. I lived an entire life here, one where I could escape how shitty my body constantly felt as a kid. For a very large part of my developmental years, my creativity ran wild in this place. Everything about AW is a relic of its time. The way the game works, the things that were created, even what the default avatars look like, and the fact that they're called avatars in the first place. All of this harkens back to a different age. And honestly, it's an age that I miss. See, while Active Worlds came out way too early to be VR, I felt that it truly got what virtual reality, or the metaverse, was always supposed to be. I've referenced Snow Crash and its metaverse a few times so far, and I realize that not everyone is familiar with that particular novel. So for starters, Snow Crash is a novel that came out in 1992 written by Neal Stephenson. It's one of those books that's hugely influential on the internet, virtual reality, and just technology in general. In Snow Crash, Stephenson built basically two separate worlds. First, there was reality. Reality in Snow Crash is a cyberpunk capitalist nightmare where the US has collapsed and has been subsumed by numerous corporate entities. Then there's the metaverse. The metaverse is a virtual reality plane you log into, a future internet built by hackers and artists. It's still very much influenced by the real world, but there's a sense that all the creativity and community that is perpetually denied in reality actually has a place there. But the metaverse isn't smooth. It's not a flawless, polished experience. It's noisy and loud, with planes crashing on the street, and, as mentioned above, giant penises walking around next to meticulously crafted avatars. Sure, the corporate trappings are still present, but they don't run the place. That's kind of the whole point. Cyberpunk is often described as high-tech, low-life, and I feel like a mishmash of art next to absolute havoc is really on point. That really captured something about the early internet, sandwiched between the yuppie runaway capitalism of the 80s and the hopefulness and technophilia of the 90s. A lot of cyberpunk literature reflects that, and I think it's really telling that the same corpus is constantly referenced in virtual reality games, or in AW's case, proto-VR games. Snow Crash was very much cyberpunk, technically post-cyberpunk. Go away, English degree! Neal Stephenson was clearly looking at the then 90s internet as a place of both potential and, well, giant corporations taking everything over, even though that hadn't happened quite yet. But heavy on the potential was really the important bit there. Oftentimes the point of cyberpunk gets lost in modern media. Take Cyberpunk 2077, for example. While we don't really know what it's like yet, a lot of what the developers have said reflect that whole high-tech, low-life maxim without really seeming to understand that the comma in that phrase is a critique. I think that, stay dead, you can't hurt me anymore! Active Worlds was the perfect representation of the metaverse, and it's no wonder. The team that built Active Worlds was certainly inspired by the book, and not just the book, but the sort of ethos that was behind it. There's always this sort of cynicism present within a lot of new technology that just doesn't feel present in AW, or at least didn't at the time. There's always the secret hand that's trying to monetize in the most aggressive way, even if that means functionally changing what makes something special. Active Worlds was devoid of that in many ways. It seemed like it was a project in building something cool and just seeing what players did with it. Essentially, it was an experiment in building the metaverse and just seeing what would happen. But the virtual communities that came after, there and Second Life specifically, always seemed not that. While Second Life developed a reputation, there was always something more streamlined, more polished, more corporate about that particular app that kept me away from it. Whereas Active Worlds was a mess, Second Life was streamlined and built more like a pre-social network than anything else. In Active Worlds, you had to find and build a community in the most jankiest, obtuse way possible. In Second Life, by comparison, they kind of rolled out the red carpet for you. That same thing can be said with There, which was an absolute abomination, a corporate fever dream that saw what was happening in virtual worlds and said someone in a boardroom go, hey, what if we sold this to MTV? Really, what was going on with virtual worlds was the same thing that was happening with the internet at large. It was changing. While it arguably was becoming more useful, it was also becoming more boxed in. There was a certain playfulness, along with a strong sense of community, that just seemed to be lost. Alright Zoomers, Old Man Straz is here to tell you about the good old days. Get on your swim trunks because we're about to surf the net. Get in your land yacht and slap on your driving gloves because it's time to cruise the World Wide Web. No, but seriously. The internet in 2020 is a wonderful thing. I'm not going to pretend like it isn't. The sheer amount of information, the ease at which you can access it, and the tools available at our fingertips are bizarre and wonderful. We're living in the future, baby! We're also right in the middle of the apocalypse, and the modern internet lets us basically order anything we want straight to our doors. The internet is, without a doubt, easier to use, more straightforward, more useful, and more prominent than it ever has been in the past. This is an obvious statement, to be blunt, but I feel like it's necessary to make before I say the next thing. In the famous words of Grammy Award winner Rob Thomas, man, it's a hot one. The internet is also really, really bad. At one time, not that long ago, the internet just didn't look like the internet we know and love. At one time, the internet wasn't the fabric holding together your social circle, nor was it the thing ensuring your food got there on time. That might seem bad, but it also wasn't something that manipulated our thoughts, constantly sold us things, harvested our data willy-nilly, let Elon Musk say anything, invaded our lives with countless algorithms, or just a billion other really crimey, scummy things. Comparing the modern internet to the internet of the past is a bit like comparing a Main Street in most towns 20 years ago to Main Street today. There's technically more stuff there now, probably, and it's probably more useful, but a lot of the charm and uniqueness that made it special just isn't there anymore. The modern internet is a giant Funko Pop. It's a miserable, twisted corporate simulacrum of ideas conjured up into plastic nonsense that you can collect and tag. It's miserable, it's cynical. A year ago, I bookmarked a comment on Reddit that I liked just so much.
The randomness of the old internet. It felt like it was truly run by the people. Now it feels super corporate and designed. Everything is planned.
We're like 2 minutes into this section and I realize I'm being pretty vague. So let me say that when I say early internet, I specifically mean the decade from about 94 to 2004. This is the period that the internet really started to evolve from something academic to, well, whatever people wanted to do with it. This meant early venture capitalist failures and the dot-com boom, but it also meant fan sites, early forums springing up from the corpse of bulletin board systems, or BBSs, and a nonstop wave of creativity and community building. There weren't any real expectations for what you could or should create, it was just a blank slate. But the thing is, for a long time, the internet wasn't really user-friendly, and that meant that people, not necessarily corporations, were the ones to fill in the gaps. You'd have bookmarks. Did people even use those anymore? Like thousands of bookmarks? To just random individual sites that people built in their basement to help you do random things. College professors used to maintain sites on their individual interests, and those were usually the best places for information. Like, if you enjoyed a TV show or a video game, you'd go to a website for that video game, and that's where everything was. And there were like 10 other websites just like that, and they'd all link to each other, and they'd have these little buttons you'd click on to get to the other sites. There were web rings. You don't even use a search engine. You would just find a web ring portal, which was a bunch of sites that were linked together, and you would click around. It was novel. It wasn't efficient, but as you jumped from site to site, there was a distinct sense of personality. You really would surf the web. You would really discover new places and things and people. And there was no algorithm or anything doing it for you. You were doing that work. Today, the internet isn't really a thing you explore. It's just a delivery system. It's a way for us to get to our apps or websites that might as well just be apps. I'm not excluding myself here either. Most days, I don't really explore the internet. The internet is just the thing that gives me access to Reddit or Twitter or Gmail. I can't honestly remember the last time I visited someone's personal website. Like, Zoomers, if you're still there. Did you know that people can just have websites? That they used to just have websites? Just like websites for stuff. Not portfolios or pictures of their cat. Just like stuff you'd find. But all of that over the last 2 decades has been transformed. Giant corporate overlords have soaked up basically all of the internet, for better or worse. Google, for example, vacuumed up so much of the search space that there basically aren't any other search engines that matter. That control fundamentally means that they dictate how the internet works and what succeeds and what doesn't. Their algorithm determines what you see. This is true for every website that houses user-created content of any kind. The algorithm theoretically directs people to what they want to see, but more accurately, it directs them to content that keeps them engaged on the platform so they have more of a chance to see the advertisements. That's why YouTube likes long content. You're more likely to stick around for advertisements if you're on one continuous video. But, of course, the content has to also be advertiser friendly. If it isn't, you'll need an alternative source of revenue. And while it's great that many channels have been able to do that, there's no doubt that this molds what content is on the platform. For every H-Bomber guy or Tentacruel, there are 1,000 garbage top 10 channels or life hacks or unboxings or whatever, just because the algorithm eats that stuff up. I mean, Christ, I go on YouTube to get away from churned out corporate media, and now I'm being served recommendations for Jimmy Kimmel? I'm not saying that everything created today on YouTube is bad, far from it. But what it is in almost every case is creativity that's been boxed in by exactly what a specific corporate overlord wants. And while creativity can live within closed off, walled in spaces, and maybe even that strict form can produce really great art, it's still limiting in a way that's just chafed against me that I just didn't realize until fairly recently. To put it another way, the introduction of Web 2.0 was supposed to usher in a new age of community-based websites and user-created content. And for a short period of time, it did. In the early 2000s, you saw the growth of sites like Newgrounds, DeviantArt, YTMND, and even Dig. Yet, not that long after, social media took over, and as the dot-com boom faded in the mirror, dollar signs once again appeared in investors' eyes. Internet mainstays died, replaced by new corporate behemoths who were restructuring the web to suit their margins. While there were brief moments of the older internet living on in these formats, once again like MySpace and even the older LiveJournal, Zanga, and whatnot, they were quickly crowded out. Hell, even the bits of absurdist creativity that somehow appeared on social media quickly turned into, this. There are likely to be people yelling at their screen now that this is just what people wanted. No one forced Facebook on them. But I'm really not so sure. It's hard to teleport back to that time, but what these technologies promised at the time and what they became are really not the same thing. Likewise, even implying that users really have genuine agency in this sort of thing is... that's for another video. But as someone that works in marketing and sees how the sausage is made, yeah, no. There's obviously a nostalgia for this particular era for folks my age, being that we are millennials. But I don't think that it was just all nostalgia. I was a huge nerd. Surprise? In high school, and I'd always have kids asking me to help them make their own website. It wasn't because they wanted to be rich, they just wanted a place to put their music or art or inside jokes or whatever. On the flip side, I have a cousin who asked me how to go about monetizing his music and YouTube channel. He's like 13. There's a certain way he looks at the internet as a tool, a business object that I totally get, but also, God, that's horribly depressing. For us, for those of us that saw the 90s and early 2000s internet, it just was something totally different. It meant something different. The old internet was a wild west of wonky, half-baked design and novices barely scraping together snippets of HTML and CSS and PHP and like Photoshop skill, but probably more accurately PaintShop Pro skill. It was a mess, crafted from paper mache and dreams, but it was beautiful and representative of a different time. When you found a tacky website, you knew it was that way because someone wanted it that way. It was intentional. The disheveled mess of the pre-.com era internet was really bad in a lot of ways, but it was also just so full of possibility. And while I've said and will continue to say creativity about 100,000 times, it was also about community. ActiveWorlds was, in many ways, perfectly representative of that time. I think virtual reality and the sense of stuff like the metaverse and Snow Crash was specifically born out of the chaotic mess the internet was in its early era. Other programs sanitized it, much in the same way that the internet itself was changed in the mid-2000s. ActiveWorlds represented that perfectly though, even though it wasn't technically virtual reality. It was the metaverse, just before the technology had a chance to really get the full way there. It was a creative playground, a massive community, and just a space where you could make anything or be anything just because you wanted to. It was genuinely beautiful, and up until recently, I thought that that particular vision wasn't something I'd ever find again. VRChat isn't something that I immediately fell in love with. In fact, VRChat sat installed on my computer from way back when I got my first VR headset, the HTC Vive. I just didn't get it at first. I walked around, wondered what the fuss was about, and then logged right off. Why would I want to talk to random people on the internet? What is there even to see here? Now, a quick aside, I think my initial reaction is due to my own internal 2.0ing. While I've always been into these creative sort of games, or whatever you want to call them, I'm also a very competitive person. I played a lot of Counter-Strike, WoW, Arena, Overwatch, Here's the Storm, and so on. For a long time, my default gaming attitude has basically just been to compete. But when you're 31 and your reaction speed is starting to slow, you can either deal with it by gracefully ducking out and admitting your limitations, find a way to improve your game sense to compensate, or just internally continue to think you're a god and instead hide within a virtual reality filled with catgirls. Considering I've been locked in my house for the last 20,000 years or so at this point, I needed to get out somehow. I just needed to not look at my walls anymore. It was much the same for my wife, and one day we just decided to give VRChat another try, and this time it felt different. My second go around had me spending some time interacting with the world and all the people in it. I spent a lot of time in public worlds, which meant that I was interacting with a pretty large cross-section of the game's player base. Every time I'd take off my headset, I'd look at my wife and just think, holy shit, this is magical. Yet I couldn't really put my finger on why. Was it just the social interactions? Was it just the people I was meeting? I mean, yeah, of course, but there was something more to it. I've interacted and been in hundreds of online communities over the years. What was different here? What was different about VRChat? Part of it was, yeah, the people, the community. There's no algorithm directing me to a lobby. There's no decision making going on beyond my own. Oh, this world looks neat? Well, then you click and there you are, right? There's nothing else to it. The end result was that I've met people from many, many countries. My friends list is ludicrously diverse. I met people in Italy, the Netherlands, Spain, France, Germany, Russia, Saudi Arabia, the Philippines, Korea, Japan, and many, many more. I've had long conversations about politics, religion, video games, anime, the weather, memes, the nature of consciousness, poop knives, music, performing. I've had so many just good conversations. And as an aside, I've missed that. How had I forgotten that I enjoyed this, that I used to love this thing? But in the Web 2.0 era, that was eradicated. Sure, Facebook groups exist, Twitter can theoretically connect you with other people, and Reddit, but these services are built to put like with like. The realities of that sort of thing have been think pieced to death, typically in regards to stuff like politics, but I kind of want to build beyond that, and maybe less seriously. Like, I just think outside of how that's damaged the world, it's also just ruined this quaint little experience. The experience of meeting random people and just talking with them. And to be clear, this wasn't something that just changed over time or was accidentally broken. It was done on purpose. The climate on social media isn't a bug, it's a feature. And once again, this is a topic way too complex to go on a tangent on, and I've done too many of those already. But yeah, the way social media encourages both division and like meeting like is not accidental, and it has undoubtedly made the internet a worse place. But VRChat isn't just the people, it's also about the things they create. And VRChat is full of beautiful, incredible things. Some of the worlds people have created in VRChat are utterly breathtaking. What people are able to do on this platform is amazing. And the thing is, you're probably watching this right now on a 2D screen, and it's probably still gorgeous to you. Now consider that these are virtual realities that you can go and explore and interact with. It's really just something else. I've probably played every major VR release on the market at this point, and while there are plenty of games that deliver memorable experiences, none do it with the rapid-fire intensity that VRChat does. I think 5 or 10 years from now, many of the people building hobby creations in VRChat are going to be working at major studios or winning awards somewhere. And yes, galleries of beautiful things exist elsewhere, but just not quite like this. And the creativity creativity isn't just in the creation of worlds, it's also in the avatars themselves. There are so many that are so neat. There's like an entire virtual fashion in VRChat and trends and people who push those things really hard. And then there's the things people do with those worlds and avatars. I've watched someone DJ a psytrance set in VR. I've watched dancing, genuinely impressive dancing. I even met a choreographer in VRChat that took pride in making routines within virtual reality. I've had a 2-foot tall anime boy in a onesie pajama thing perform an improv dance routine in front of me using his custom avatar. A lot of these things are often broken and messy, and they glitch out, and they aren't always there. They require digging and seeing a lot of objectively strange and unsettling things. But the thing is, you see people's work too. You see the learning process. You see the janky worlds and the broken avatars, some of which glitch out in hysterical ways. All of this would have been blocked off somewhere else. All of this would have been just swept out into a bin. It would have been polished and optimized. It would have been flattened and streamlined, but not here. It's a paradise of high-effort shitposts. I've taken a ride on a hot dog with glitched out clipping music screaming in the background. I've had a stick of butter give me a lap dance. It's insanity, actual insanity. And there's no other place like this on the internet. There's no place like this, period, anymore. And look, I know, creative places exist. Creativity is all over the internet. But these days, even creativity seems organized and structured, treated to the same algorithmic soup that runs the rest of the internet. I don't want DeviantArt. I want the old DeviantArt. Give me the messy form. Give me the disorganized gallery. The old internet was like this. ActiveWorlds was like this. There was no real sense to it, and there's still art there that's long been buried into digital sand. The entropy of failed hard drives likely killing many a creation before they were seen by anyone. There are thousands of worlds. I'll never visit all of them. And maybe to some, that's a tragedy. Maybe there should be some sort of algorithm that shows me the ones that are most organized, most optimized, cleanest, and most artistic. But I don't want that. I want the postmodern chaotic soup that birthed the impossible to explain websites and wonderfully bizarre creations like YTMND. That primordial soup is what created the soul of the internet, and for so long it's been banished in favor of one-page websites and endless software-as-a-service clones. But VRChat brings the mess back. I'm sure that seems like a backhanded compliment, but it isn't. Hundreds of applications and games and relaunches of games have tried so hard to recapture what made that era wonderful. The community of it, the sense of awe and wonder, the genuine feeling of logging in and not knowing what you'll find today, of who you'll meet, of what you'll see, of what memories you'll make. There's no psychological tooling at play. There's no Skinner's box. There's no algorithm. This right here is what was lost. Earlier, I mentioned that the current internet is just a delivery service. Well, the old one was too, but it's what it's delivering you to that's the difference. The old internet was a playground of endless possibility, and yes, obviously people were trying to make money on it, and it was commodified and sliced up by corporations then too, but there was at least the illusion of choice, of creative freedom. The new internet is built to be a frictionless experience. It's designed in every way to monetize every click, every movement of your mouse. Virtually the last 2 or even 3 decades have been entirely defined by the simple question, how can we possibly squeeze more money out of this internet thing? And that's led to so many issues, so many deep problems that'll take, generations to solve. It makes me feel silly complaining about losing the old internet or whatever. And yet, as silly as it might be, logging into VRChat makes me feel excited in a way that I haven't in years. VRChat is magical because of that. It gets me excited about the internet again. It successfully fools me if just for this moment in history, this time freeze in quarantine, that yes, the internet is a wonderful place, full of possibility. And I know practically it's never been easier to be creative on the internet than this moment in time. But that creativity always seems like it's designed to go somewhere, to lead to a job or monetization somehow. And I know I even mentioned future developers earlier, but that was more of a nod to the talent of people on this platform than anything else. Everyone playing this game who wants to create an avatar or world has to pick up Unity and Blender and learn a whole set of skills that is practically useless to them. But it means that they can create and add to this world. that they can show off to friends, that they can build communities that are absurd anywhere else. And the thing is, I know I'm not the only one who feels this way. I've seen the general thought of VRChat feels like the old internet many, many times by fellow users. So honestly, my advice is this. If you do miss that old internet, give VRC a try. I think you'll get it if you spend some time with it. Likewise, if you don't know what I'm talking about and never got to experience that firsthand, well, give it a try too. And if you do like what you see, know that those of us now entering our 30s are beyond excited for you to get to experience what we did for the first time. VRChat is magical. It's the absurdity of the metaverse. It's the beauty of the old internet. It's like hopping into a time machine, but also going to the future, merging, and should I write a Steins Gate reference? We got the microphone. God, it's gonna be fun lining that one up. So if you're wondering if all of my videos, presuming there's gonna be more than just this one, but anyway, if you're assuming that all of my videos are gonna be this cheesy, yes, the answer is yes. This is all I know. This is what you're gonna get. There's two things that I think are really left that I haven't had a chance to get to just yet, and I kind of want to address them before closing things out. The first thing is, like, what about the other VR worlds, the other VR programs that exist? What about them? Obviously, VRChat isn't the only one that's out there, and so doesn't everything I just say apply to them too? Now, I'm talking about things like Anyland and Space and Sansar and even something like Rec Room or whatever thing Zuckerberg is cooking up. The thing is, they all have their merits. I'm not going to tell you that I don't think that some of them are cool too. The thing is I think they're fundamentally cool for different reasons. They bring something interesting to the table. Sansar really does seem, for example, like it's gonna really kill those virtual events. I shouldn't do that with a microphone. There's also some of the other ones that I haven't really mentioned or touched on that do things like use Bitcoin and cryptocurrency to make VR better. And obviously, I think that there's neat stuff about all of these, but they all are kind of coming at the problem in a weird way. And when I say the problem, I mean this sort of thing that I think VRChat is so good at, which is creating communities. I think when you look at it, all of these places are sort of trying to create a community from the ground up in a very manufactured sort of way. Like, to look at it in a different light, VRChat, basically the developers of VRChat, they never intended for things to be this way. I mean, like, I said that early on. When VRChat was started, the developers never said, let's get a bunch of weebs together and create paradise for them. They basically just created a program and fertilized it. And just said, okay, whatever community appears, we'll do our best to nourish. And that's exactly what they did. It's what has basically happened. When a bunch of weebs did come along and it became, you know, de facto for everyone to have anime avatars or whatever, they just kind of went with it. And they did a fantastic job of taking that community that was naturally occurring in their app and making sure that it had somewhere to grow. They never intended from day one to build that community, but when it did appear, they made sure that they supported it. You can kind of draw a parallel to here is actually esports. Strangely enough, if you look at a lot of games these days, they're kind of built from the ground up with this idea that we're going to invent an esport. Basically every game that comes out, they talk about tournaments and whatnot, when in reality, the best and most successful games in that particular field kind of happen organically. And a lot of the times when you just try to build something from the ground up to be a certain way, well, it just doesn't work.
Man, who would be a fan of an AstroTurfed esports league? Oh shit.
The most successful esports were organic. Counter-Strike, for example, that basically was a slow build over 20 years. Valve never thought it would turn into what it did, but you kind of see where that's gone. Really, that's what I see for many of these competitors. Like Sansar, which I was talking about before, they really want to be the virtual nightclub space, but like I showed you, that kind of exists in VRChat, and there's a thriving community there. I've been to many VR raves, which is not something I thought I would ever say. Look at me. Do I look like the kind of person that goes to a rave? Regardless, VRChat kind of has that special thing, which they found a community and they ran with it. That's just not something you see nowadays. Everything that's built, like that Reddit quote said from earlier, is planned. From the very beginning, it's we're gonna put this community in this app. We're making this app for this community. And it makes sense why things are that way. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be. It's just that I think that is one of the things that makes VRChat magical. I also just think, and this is kind of smaller part of that, is that most of those spaces have been sort of sanitized. And I always feel bad saying that because I don't necessarily think that moderation is a bad thing. But yeah, for Altspace, it's very clearly supposed to be something a tad bit more corporate. And yeah, to lead into whatever crazy contraption Zuckerberg is creating, I don't know. Realistically, it's gonna be bad. And the reason it's gonna be bad, well, just go back and watch that section about there. Oh, I gotta fix my anime cat over here. Oh, good enough. Now, to the bigger one, it's monetization. We have to look at the fact that VRChat realistically needs to make money. Currently, VRChat is basically sustained by investor funds. Now, investor funds are great. They basically let you build a team and let you build the thing that you want to build without having to worry too much about anything other than building it. But eventually, those investors are going to want their money back and they're going to want to see a profit. And this is where many people get kind of antsy about VRChat. Most of the things in the video that we just talked about went from good to bad because of monetization. This is the literal billion-dollar question, which is how do you manage to sustain a platform while keeping the feel of the platform? And to be perfectly honest, much bigger programs, much bigger things and communities than VRChat have totally failed at this. I honestly don't know what the answer to monetization is, and I'm not going to try and guess at what it could be. What I am going to say is that there's almost no doubt that no matter what they decide to do, it's going to fundamentally just change the platform. You can't basically add a price tag on something and expect it to remain the same, but there's gonna have to be one eventually. Having met many of the people on the VRChat team, I believe at the very least they are going to try their best. But who can say? I can't sit here and tell you that they're going to come out with some magical solution that is going to allow VRChat to stay as it is today forever. And that's kind of why I made this video, to be perfectly honest. I don't know if VRChat's gonna stay the same forever. So this is what I'll leave you with. VRChat is magical. It combines ideas from decades ago with the pizzazz of the 2000s, with technology that never existed really, at least not to most people, like 10 years ago with the advent of virtual reality or mainstream virtual reality. And even if you don't have virtual reality, even if you like take the virtual reality bit and put it over there or something, just the freedom to create in a meaningful place, and with the amount of power that Unity through VRChat gives you, is just, it's amazing. It's a magical place that is not just the creativity that spawns within it, but is the community that essentially puts all these things together and does stuff with them. However, like I hinted at, I'm not quite sure that it's going to be this way forever. I hope that the developers are able to maintain this sense of wonderment, that it just bestows upon me. But in the case that it doesn't, I would really like to invite other people to experience the same thing that I have experienced. And so with that, if you have the time, go download VRChat, give it a whirl, hop in. You, like me, might not get it at first. You might end up walking around and saying, this isn't for me. And maybe in a couple months, you'll get the bug like I did and come back and just be blown away. Regardless, thank you for watching. This was a fun journey. Maybe I'll make another one. Goodbye.